Alrighty, so welcome everyone. For those who are guests to this classroom space, my name is Dr. Rosales. My gender pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm instructor of Psych 350 Social Psychology. This event is for the class, but also for folks in the greater CSUMB community who are interested in the topic. Today, we are very fortunate to have 3 activist collectives with us to talk about their work in the community related to policing and law enforcement. We have River and Ezra with Community Before Cops, Miriam with 831 Action Teams, and Sienna with Students for Quality Education at CSUMB. Before we do a more thorough introduction of our panelists, I have a few slides to share with you. So the purpose for today's event is first and foremost for the students of Psych 350 to complete part of their class assignment, but it's also for the wider community at CSUMB to connect with local activists. And it's also an opportunity for us to engage in meaningful discussion about law enforcement and what it means to reimagine public safety. So a note about space guidelines and structure. I've had a chance to talk to the panelists before today. So we talked about like what are kind of the expectations that we have for the space. And see, these are some of the ones we came up with. First is we value everyone's opinion and we want to hear all your points of view. So this is the space to be asking some of those more challenging questions because the panelists are interested in answering that and tackling some of these challenging questions that don't always get talked about. But of course, always be mindful of the impact of your comment or question, how it might impact the folks around you. So make sure you're always asking questions or comments from a place of curiosity and really wanting to try and understand. Another note that they wanted me to let you know is that we can agree to disagree, but we must be respectful. So when I asked, like, well, what does respect mean? Some of the things that they mentioned were refrain from interrupting folks. So make sure that folks have finished talking. And if it helps, maybe there's, you can use the raise hand feature that Zoom provides to prevent accidental interruptions. Same thing, please try to avoid from name calling, try using I statements to speak from your own experience. And similar to the point I made before, when we come to disagreement, try to understand the other person's experiences with trying to answer like the why question, why might someone be thinking that? So coming again from a place of curiosity. So in terms of the structure, as I mentioned, today's event is recorded, and this was at the suggestion of one of the panelists. And we have consent from all the panelists to do this as a way to make sure that what is learned here can continue being shared with folks who were not able to come to this event. I will start by creating the space for panelists to introduce themselves and their work. And then I, as the moderator, I'll start out by asking a few opening questions, and each collective or representative of each collective can take a couple minutes to answer that. But then the second half, it'll be really an open forum for you all just to ask your questions and ask maybe some follow-up questions to some of the things that came up. So let's go ahead and get started. So for each of the panelists, if you could take a couple minutes to say your name, your gender pronoun, and then we're going to start with these first 2 questions. The first one is, tell me about your collective organization and what work you do in the community. And relatedly, what is your collective's organization's vision for social change? What social changes would you like would your collective like to see in our society? So maybe Community Before Cops, Ezra and River, would you be willing to go ahead and introduce yourselves and start first?
Yeah, I can go first. Hi, I'm Ezra. I use they, them pronouns. So the question was collectively, what's the work that I kind of do? I mostly do queer organizing for the LGBTQIA+ community, but after George Floyd was murdered, I felt a need to step up to better support Black Lives Matter and racial justice issues. So over the summer, I spent a lot of time organizing with Miriam and River, doing Black Lives Matter rallies and attending city council meetings and really advocating for changing, reimagining what policing looks like in our community. And the second question, what do I imagine, or what are my goals? I just want to see the system change in such a way that it values the inherent worth and dignity of everyone that's a part of it. But you know, that's really that's a widespread thing. Yeah, I'll pass it on to River or Miriam.
Yeah, since Ezra and I are both connected with a number of different fields of work and also community before cops, I guess I'll jump in next and say my name is River Navai. My pronouns are they, them, or she, her. And I am, I'm working with community before cops, basically. And we're a loose collective. Often, the people in our organization are just the people who show up that week. And it's in our name, right? There's two key words, which is community and cops. So we were formed when we saw the death of George Floyd and Tony McDade, and of course Breonna Taylor earlier that year, and Tatiana Jefferson, and so many Black people killed by police violence. Understanding the many decades or even centuries long history of policing in itself, having, essentially violent structures in place and racist structures in place. In fact, policing is often what's used to enforce the racist structures that are in the fabric of the society we live in, which includes housing, it includes business, wages, capitalism in general, and of course like media and representation and all of this stuff. And policing is the armed force that kind of protects this status quo system that continually, structurally, historically, and contemporarily continues to harm Black bodies and keep Black people disenfranchised, and trans people, and immigrants, and disabled people. Like there's a lot of people, homeless people, mentally ill people, but we do know that Black people are disproportionately harmed. And so as this uprising is regaining force in the early end of May and beginning of June, around the death of George Floyd, may he rest in peace and power, we also noticed that the local cities here in Monterey County were all coming up on the end of their fiscal year, because the fiscal year ends at the end of June and begins in the beginning of July. And so budgets were being redrawn, redrafted, and voted upon. And we noticed that while many social services, such as recreation programs and libraries and arts programs and things like that, were being cut due to the perception that we can't offer these things during COVID-19, police budgets were actually increasing largely across the county. And so while we saw this public outcry to begin taking away some of the power that police have, we saw that police were being funded even more heavily here in our county, while many resources that people just need to survive were being cut out of a perceived lack. Monterey County, our industry is largely tourism, and that's affected by COVID-19. So we're gonna have less tax dollars, we're gonna have less money, but we choose to continue to give it to policing, and we just felt like, no, we wanna fund the community before cops. And so some of the work that we do is, a lot of the work that we do is just information dissemination and sharing what time these city council meetings are, how it is that you call in and put your public comment, what the issues are that are on the table, and how people can add their voices to the conversation, empowering people to participate in local government. but also actually trying to uplift the community. So we've collaborated with Miriam's group, Community 831 and Pause the Calls and 831 action teams on, you know, efforts to help. Well, I'll let her tell you more about it, but, you know, helping with homeless encampments here and help tackling some racist business owners who call the police on Black people, like for petty reasons. And then now currently we're just trying to put out voter information. And I think that our collective's vision for social change is to see alternatives to policing put in place so that we can gradually but tangibly reduce our dependence on policing and reduce the harm done to Black and brown bodies, trans bodies, disabled bodies, and mentally ill people, reducing the harm done to all of them, all of us, by this traditional structure of policing.
And Miriam, and I see that Miriam is going by another name today. He's Hezekiah. Would you like to introduce yourself and talk about 831 action teams? Miriam, are you there?
I think your mic is muted.
My mic was good. I was talking away.
Oh, okay.
So I'm Miriam Smith, and I go and Hezekiah is my son. That was Hezekiah. He was using the computer, and I didn't know he had put his name in there. I'm not computer savvy at all, so I don't know how to change it. But you know, I'm just like, but I'm pretty powerful in the things that I do, and that's just not one. So I work, you know, what I like. Well, I want to share this is where we started from, was to reduce policing in our community. And I'm going to put this up. Can people see that? I'm just going to put it up, and then I know you're recording, so I'm pretty sure we can get it. But this is what Pause the Cause started off from, is to reduce harm in our community, and we jumped off because of Tamir Rice being shot as a 12-year-old son. I'm a 12-year-old child in seconds, and the cop getting away with it. We really went more out there and really tried to do more in the community to get people to not call the cops and to work with then programs in the city to reduce harm among the cops, and try to get an audience to work with the chief of police to not send the cops out for all these little petty calls, to pause the calls too. That wasn't the only reason we jumped off. My nephew had a gun put to his head at 16 years old, a couple of years before that. And it really upset me, and I was trying to figure out what to do, but it just, I guess the push was the two of them having that, we started working on these issues, and what really made us go more public was Tamir Rice. Then we started having meetings, events, and everything to let people know, look, we just have to pause the call. Why, you know, some of the reasons is, there's a question is, why do you use the cops? What do you have to stop and think, why are you picking up the phone to call the cops? Why are you using the cops? Because what we have learned, and as a Black woman in Seaside all of my life, but I've traveled, married 2 different military guys and traveled all over. Seaside was my home of records, so I'm a native. I've learned, dealing with people everywhere, that cops are used. Cops are used as people's bodyguard. Cops are used as people's threat to you. Most of the time, people will threaten you with, I will call the cops. And cops aren't always doing the job that they trained for or that they started out to do. And the fallback is many of us being killed by the cops because of that, because they don't intend to show up to the house because of a lot of noises or because of a old woman calling because the strangers in the neighborhood. That wasn't what they signed up for the job to do. So as a result, many Black people are harmed because of all these suspicious calls, because they are trained in a short amount of time to kill, and we are the ones that they target because so why do people call the cops? That was the biggest problem, was why are you picking up the phone calling the cops? Well, in my neighborhood, in my homes, and in the places that I dealt with a lot of Blacks, people were saying, I'm gonna call the cops and tell the cops, yeah, you did this. I'm gonna call the cops and tell the cops you did that. And people would tell each other, well, if you call the cops, they have a gun, they'll show up faster. If you tell the cops they have a knife, they'll come. So a lot of that aggravated me when I saw how the cops treated us over time. Just processing that information, it was like, okay, we got the cops showing up for what? Why are the cops even showing up in the first place? So what do we do about it? And so a lot of this work went into, why do people call the cops? And now what do we do about this unhealthy dependency on the police? And then they come and they do not de-escalate. They escalate things and they harm Black people. As a result, they harm and they kill and they destroy lives. They destroy communities. They destroy homes. And so how do we fix that? What do we do about that? Well, we're responsible as a community. We're responsible as a people. So starting Pause the Cause was an initiative to stop the unhealthy relationship between the community and the cops, and to get people to not buy in from both sides, from the people that call the cops and from the side of the police. Don't stop harming us. Don't de-escalate. We wanted more de-escalation training. We wanted more stuff to happen. And as a result, in the city of Seaside, none of that stuff really happened. It seemed to kind of get worse with numbers. Our neighbors, our people in the neighborhood came together to stop the violence, not the police. So again, the question is, why do we call the police? Because they come for revenge. They come after the fact most of the time, and they are not there as your personal bodyguard or safety. You should hire a personal bodyguard, or hire somebody to manage your security, to manage your property. I just don't think the cops should be called in on everything. So that's a part of the work we're doing in the community, among the neighbors, and also among the policing the city part. Pause the Cause, our team is 831 Action Team, and we are promoting Pause the Cause as a more excellent way to reduce harm in our community, a solution for stopping police brutality. And so it's important, when people get ready to call the cops or think of the police, they have to think of it, from the beginning. Cops started as slave catchers, and then they came along with the Jim Crow laws, and they started out as to manage people who had skin color like myself. So, and we ended up on the bad part of it. They want to say the uprisings across the country are violent and riots, and there's 95% of them have been peaceful. And it's known fact that people come in and join just to do that, but that's not the Black Lives Matter movement, to tell you to stop harming us, to tell you to defund the police because the police are harming us. That's the intention of the Black Lives Matter movement, is to reduce the presence of the police from harming us. So, we have a part to do here in our community, but we have to keep, asking ourselves the question is, why are we calling the police? Is it for revenge? Is it for hate? Is it to tell a lie to satisfy self-satisfaction? Is it real? Because we did a study in Seaside alone, and we're doing it in Monterey County, all the cities, and 90% of the calls, up to 95% of the calls, were non-violent calls. So petty reasons to call the cops can cost somebody's life. So pausing the cause is a very important initiative that needs to be in every city across the United States. I hope to get it in there, and I need people's help to do that. But it's an ideal to think about. If you stop and don't rush, everybody knows if you rush into something, you know, it could be chaotic, it could be bad. But if you stop, you know, you're already de-escalating it yourself. You're already, you know, slowing things down. I don't want to talk too much, but try to give an overview of, you know, this social change can develop with the power of the people and with the understanding that the people are in charge. They created the monsters that are happening. Uh, they created it without even knowing, you know, because they wanted, it was all about self, you know. I'm calling cops because this. I'm calling cops because I don't like you. I don't like this. I'm a Karen. I'm calling cops because you shouldn't be barbecuing in the park. I'm calling cops because I'm calling cops. I'm calling cops. I'm calling cops. And then the cops are called and they come and a black person is there and it's escalated because there's a narrative in the minds of the people from the past that has followed us to this day that black skins are skin colors to be scared of, and we're not, you know. But so the change that I look for is to see people not calling the cops so much and to see the cops not showing up for nonviolent issues and problems to escalate and cause harm to community members. That's the social change that I expect to see, so much that we will be able to, as community members, prove to everyone that we do not need the presence of the cops to resolve any issues. And when they show up, they don't resolve issues. People are going to jail, people are being harmed. There is no issues being resolved. That's the whole thing. So we need to go back to trusting our own selves, trusting our neighbors, trusting our friends. And we need to go back to trusting survival in a different kind of way rather than revenge, I want to say. And so let somebody else talk.
Thank you so much, Miriam. Sienna, are you ready to share?
Yes. Hello, everybody. My name is Sienna Fields, and I go by she, her pronouns. I am an intern representing Students for Quality Education. We go by SQE, so you'll hear me say SQE throughout the time that I'm speaking. SQE is a statewide organization throughout all of the CSU schools. We are currently on 23 campuses, and we're a student-led organization comprised of all CSU students from all different types of backgrounds. And our work is particularly to make sure that we're seeing that the CSU is and returns back to a higher education institute that is free, accessible, and offers quality and equitable education for all California residents and those abroad. And by free, we have a specific emphasis on free from discrimination, free from harm, and free from fear. And that'll bring me to what I'll be talking about primarily today. SQE has started a new No Harm, Disarm campaign. That's the name of our police abolition campaign. And it was actually started in 2017 as a response to a trigger warning, a murder that happened to a Black student at Humboldt State University. His name was Josiah Lawson. Josiah ended up being stabbed to death in the Humboldt community. And I'm not sure if you all are aware, but the climate of Humboldt is very tense from race. It's a very racist area with a lot of white supremacists. So as a response to his death still to this day goes unsolved. His murder is unsolved, and SQE and all BIPOC students in the community in Humboldt saw that there was a need to push for police reform, because it was an issue where the police were, like we're all saying, the narrative is that the police are supposed to protect us and especially protect students on college campuses. And as a response to Josiah's murder, a Black student, a Black man's murder, the police did little to nothing in order to solve the murder. They weren't doing their jobs, which is what everyone says that they're hired to do. So SQE took it upon themselves to start this No Harm, Disarm campaign to say, well, police, you say that you're here to protect students, you're here to protect the communities, but you aren't. So if there's no harm, like you say there is, when a Black student or a Black person is murdered, there's no harm, then disarm yourselves. There should be no need for police to be armed on campuses if they aren't going to do their jobs that they're designed to do. So that was how our campaign started in 2017. But since then, we have changed our campaign from reformists to abolitionists, like every other organization has talked about in the wake of George Floyd. And in relation to all other murders of unarmed Black and brown bodies, we decided that we need to reframe our campaign to more of an abolitionist approach. And this year and the years prior, because we know that getting police off campus is going to be a tall, tall task to complete, we are focused on removing all police from all CSU campuses. So that is our immediate focus, though we do have an intentional and priority focus on abolition at the CSUs. We also fight for other student rights. When we say free, we mean free from tuition. I'm not sure if all of you know, especially students who are in here, but the CSU should actually be free for all California residents. So we're trying to work back and getting to making sure that the CSU is offering education that the students in California can afford, that's affordable, that it's quality, and that it's equitable, and that comes from also a social justice lens, but also not just centered on Black and brown bodies and police abolition. We also do a lot of different work for mutual aid, making sure students have resources, making sure that the CSU budgets are reflecting on priority for students first. And in addition, we also are sponsored by and work with the CFA, which is the California Faculty Association. And that is the union for all of the CSU faculty and employees. And alongside with the CFA, we work on different bills to help support faculty, because we believe that faculty working conditions are student learning conditions, and we can only be get the best education that we can and be as best students as our faculty are presented with the right rights, the right resources, the right atmospheres for teaching us within their jobs. As far as a vision for social change for our collective, we would like to see the CSU return to a place that truly promotes diversity, and in that has a priority focus on BIPOC students and a specific intention on Black and Indigenous students. And in regards to that, we also would like a specific increase of representation for faculty, and specifically mental health counselors and faculty at all of the CSUs, and make sure that there's BIPOC representation from that field for students, because we know that that's extremely important. In addition, we would also love to see, and we're hoping and fighting and pushing every day to see cops be removed from our campus, because as all of the other panelists spoke about, we all know that Black and brown bodies are disproportionately affected by police brutality, and that is not limited to outside of the university. A lot of this also happens on college campuses, not only at CSUMB, but across the country. And so we would love to see all of these changes that everyone's talking about. And in addition, we'd also love to see the greater community be reduced from cops and police brutality. So that's just a little bit about our collective.
Thank you, Sienna. So the next set of questions are, what is some of the work that you are most proud of in your collective? And I think some of you might have already touched on that, but also to add on to that, what are some of the biggest challenges, obstacles facing the community you serve? So I guess you also kind of touched on that too, but if you wanted to add more to that or be more specific, and I don't know if River or Ezra from Community Before Cops would like to start again.
I'll jump in. Although I do want to, okay, so I'm gonna flip this on its head a tiny bit, because what is some of the work that we're most proud of in our collective and organization? I would actually like to chat about some of the stuff that we have done that has been not that great, and that, hopefully I can be proud of our response to, being what has often been called out, right? Being called out, but also can be being called in. And so there's been a couple times where let's say actions that Community Before Cops, which is a primarily white organization, we are always looking for leadership from people of color and primarily Black women. And so I'm super excited to be meeting Sienna and to be here alongside Miriam. But we have sometimes jumped on actions and have overstepped Miriam and paused the calls, or have in some ways, not intentionally, but in effect, right? The intent may not match the impact. but the impact does matter. And so like when we jumped on organizing a consultation with a representative from CAHOOTS, which is the Eugene, Oregon emergency response team that is, you know, a like decades long organization that does emergency response work as an alternative to police showing up, I guess, to like mental health crises is like number one, and also people affected by houselessness, trespassing, or needing help. So CAHOOTS shows up. So we had the opportunity to connect with someone who knew someone from CAHOOTS. So we got them to give a presentation, and we invited like some local mayors and city council people. But that, in effect, CAHOOTS is also white-led. And so in effect, that did overstep some of the work of Pause the Calls, which is a very similar initiative that, you know, is not actively in practice the way that CAHOOTS is, because they don't have city funding, but that idea and that initiative has been around in our community for a long time. And so like, I guess what I'm saying is like some of the work that I'm not the most proud of is going ahead, taking these actions without checking in with the Black leaders in our community, without making sure that we're not just inviting them to the presentation that we've organized, but we're inviting them to the organization of whether or not we're even going to do this presentation or how we're going to go about doing it. And so, yeah, that's one of the biggest challenges facing us as well, is that we're not a white organization, but like our makeup tends to be majority white, and we interface with a lot of white people who are still like, and older white people who are like in that area between like central kind of liberal and like far left radical abolitionist, right? So we've got a lot of people on that spectrum. And so some of the challenges are that you know, some folks want us to take a more conservative stance, and other folks want us to take a more radical stance. And getting everyone even just to participate in the conversation so that we can do something, that is a challenge. That's a big challenge. And then, you know, continuing to want to seek leadership and guidance from people of color, and specifically Black and Indigenous people of color and women, and you know, other like marginalized genders, so trans people and, you know, gender nonconforming people. We want to be defaulting to their leadership without asking extra labor from them, and that's a fine line to walk. For me, you know, that's a fine line to try to balance of like, hey, like we need some guidance, but we don't want you to do this work for us. We want to like I hope that that's the right kind of allyship, is like, what do you need? And how can I use like the many privileges that I have in this community, you know, including my white privilege, more than including my white privilege, right? Centering on my white privilege. How can I use that in service? How can I take on some of that labor so that it's not just Black people who are fighting for Black people's empowerment? But it's difficult, you know, it's difficult and it's humbling. And, you know, I'm proud of it, even though it's like a discomfort that is like constantly inside of me. I would say that it's important to be facing and engaging with in a real way, and that's why I want to like speak vocally about it. And my shirt that I just grabbed out, like this wasn't even intentional, but it says use your power to empower. And it makes me think of a tweet from one of my favorite organizers and authors. Her name's Ijeoma Oluo, and you can find her on Twitter. I'll put her name in the chat, but she has a tweet that says something akin to, look for the places where your privilege intersects with someone else's oppression. And that is the piece of the system that you have the power to destroy. So you may be a person of color, but you may be a man. And so can you look for where your male privilege intersects with someone's oppression based on gender? And can you help do that? Whereas I might be a white person and, you know, I am like perceived as female, but I am non-binary, and I you know, how can I help people of color, because that's where my privilege sits. So anyway, this is kind of like broad and philosophical, but those are my thoughts to these questions. I'll pass it to anybody else on the panel.
I'll go. Thank you, River. I want to echo a lot of what River said. I was also guilty of some of those things, but you know, I am proud of our cultural ability to learn and grow from these mistakes that we make. Like I've been doing activism work for 10 years. I've never seen such a graceful culture of accountability, which is so important in work that we're trying to find accountability for police, right? Like, you know, it's very much walking the walk, right? What's the other question? What are some of the biggest challenges? For me in the past, a big challenge for me personally, when I was doing queer community activism specifically, I felt like there's a lot of apathy amongst the localized area here. Like marginalized groups often feel safe enough to not do anything in terms of like the queer community, from my personal observation. But at the same time, my queer activism stuff was not as demanding as the call for accountability for police and reimagining what police reform and abolition, whatever public safety looks like, because that's a big conversation. It's really difficult. But yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much. And I really appreciate both of you. Just to make sure that some things are drawn out that I really appreciate is the recognizing your own mistakes, but also understanding the difference between intention versus impact, and that you might come in with a really great intention, but if you're not careful of the impact, it doesn't really matter a whole lot what your intention was going in if the impact is harm. So I really like that and want us as a class and everyone here just to be thinking about that a lot. So would either Miriam or Sienna like to go next?
Yeah, I can go. I would say that some of the work we're most proud of in SQE most recently is the passing and acceptance of Assembly Bill 1460, which is an ethnic studies requirement that's now going to be implemented throughout the CSU system. So starting in 2024, all undergraduate students will have to take a 1-course, 3-credit ethnic studies class to graduate. And that was a really big push that not only SQE and the CFA have been fighting for years, but it's been like 60 years in the making, just from activists and especially specifically Black activists in higher education and academia throughout the US entirely. And more specifically, Dr. and Assembly Member Shirley Weber had started the bill in California and has led most of the initiatives towards pushing for it. So I would say that's something that most recently we're most proud of helping and advocating for and getting passed, because it not only uplifts BIPOC faculty and making sure that all of those faculty members and professors and lecturers who are studying within the field of ethnic studies, it's also promoting and uplifting BIPOC voices in higher education, having representation that is much needed. Because if I'm going to school and I see nothing in my education or my coursework that looks like me, that tells my story or my history, that can be very problematic and very difficult for students to navigate, as a Black student myself can attest to that. So that's some of the work that we're most proud of. And as far as the biggest challenges and obstacles facing our community, being a student at CSUMB, going to a predominantly white institution, and more specifically Latinx, it's kind of difficult right now getting a lot of people just to listen to us about abolition. Our campaign, the way we've structured it, a lot of times it comes off very harsh, as in, we want cops removed off campus tomorrow. And we know that's unrealistic and that's really not the case. So I would say that the most difficult task that we have right now is just finding a way to appeal to students and even faculty members and admin eventually when we get to those levels of the hierarchy who we need to speak to in order to get our initiatives passed and get our jobs done, is finding a way to connect to people that doesn't come off as harsh as what we're asking for might seem. A lot of people that I found are uneducated on the topic of abolition and how abolitionist frameworks work, and they think like, oh, all people who are for abolition are saying, okay, we want cops removed tomorrow, we want it done, all arms are gone, like how are we going to be safe, is most of the rhetoric and pushback that we get. So I would say the difficulty is connecting to people in a way that best serves them, so that they can hear us and we can hear them and their concerns, so that we have more of an open dialogue within our community, instead of us being portrayed as, hey, we want cops gone tomorrow, and anybody who doesn't follow that cannot be a part of us. So that's really not our goal, and that's not our approach at all as an organization. We love to hear from students, all different types of backgrounds. We're nonpartisan, so from conservatives to liberals to radicals, we love everyone's opinion, and we just want to come and present facts about why an abolitionist framework would work better for those populations of students and faculty who are disproportionately affected by police brutality. So I would say that's some of the most challenging obstacles we faced thus far.
Nice. Thank you so much for sharing that. It's good to know what's happening at CSUMB and on our campus, and it's good to know the initiatives that are happening. And also, like you said, it's like 60 years of work behind some of this work that has come up. Miriam, would you like to go next?
Yeah, so there are I want to thank River and Riley for sharing first. And I just want to say we're constantly evolving, and there are quite a few things that I'm happy about with Policy Calls, like some of the events that River talked about was a white lady calling the cops on a Black person for parking in her parking spot of her business, her restaurant. That, we took that to a level to show that we don't want that kind of stuff happening anymore in the community of Seaside or even in Monterey County, because it's harmful. Cops did not show up that day, but the mere ideal that I can use the cop as my personal bodyguard or my security for my business has to stop. The lady didn't even live in Seaside. She had a business in Seaside, but she lived in Carmel. One of the important things that I see that came out of that is that we had a choice to destroy her business with just destroying her and constantly harassing her, or you wouldn't call it harassing when you're petitioning and you're protesting and you're picketing, but it would have been perceived to her as harassment. It doesn't matter to me. To get the job done, you have to keep showing up and you have to keep working on it. So we showed up. We let her know we're not having this, but probably, the fact that we work collaboratively together on this between Community for Cops, Pause the Cause, 831 Action Team, we all work together to make and move forward. And I like the idea that we can call in a group and the group shows up. I want to say that as what's name was talking about, the group that they called in to come and do a demonstration, how it really did slam us because it was a white group and white led, and it's been going for 30 years, but it has no effect on the outcry across the country for us as Black people that are harmed by the cops. The 30 years that they've been going, it's a mental health thing. They save money in their city, but the years that it's been going in a predominantly white community with white folks' perspective. And everyone should know that education and educated people working in things causes harm a lot of times to Black people. If they don't know, then they need to know. We need to talk about that. Only 27% of the people that are educated in the United States are Black, and many of them don't get jobs. My daughter graduated CSUMB 6 years ago, and she's working at a grocery store and been working as a cashier since she graduated, basically. So it's hard to get us in jobs once we graduate. So when you say you have to have educated people over us to stop the harm from happening to us, and they've been doing it for 30 years and we still got harm, and then they come into our community and do it in our community, it's still leaving the Black people behind. that are harmed disproportionately the most. And that was one of the most aggravating things that I saw with the program. Not that the program exists and how long it's been existing, but let's stop pulling stuff from the past that hasn't been effective to include Black people and to stop the harm from Black people. And let's start, if we have to start all over, start now, where they don't even talk about it in college yet. They don't even have a program for it. It's not designed. Let's start now and stop the harm. So we have a Black-led organization that should be respected in our community. And now we are going after a grant in the city of Seaside. We will be soon a part of Seaside, whether we get the grant or we have to go directly to the city of Seaside to ask for money to start our program. We are a startup, organic, grassroots, Black-led organization and should be respected because from our perspective, and we need people to join us and keep working with us, but from our perspective, the harm that's being done to Black people needs to be addressed, and it's not always with an educated person. I want to make that very clear because education has been around for years, but we're not the ones that get all the jobs that makes the difference. We are the ones that are tokens and that are proud of our jobs. And when you see us, it's sparse and few, but we don't have enough to make an impact. And so therefore our lives are constantly being harmed because no one's going to listen to that token as much as they're going to patronize that token. And I hope I'm being very clear because I see it happening. I'm old and I've been here all my life and I see us being patronized. But when it's impactful and needs to change, like I showed up to the campus for a sit-in on October the 1st. Now I got a notice a couple of days before that it wasn't going, but I didn't pay attention to that. So I showed up for the sit-in and they said it's been canceled. And they use this card, you know, it's not essential service or whatever. They pulled this out to stop and block. But the impact is not there when we're used as a token. So we need to be used and we need to go back to the drawing board, recreate and develop what works for everyone. And since the Black people are left behind, I'm sticking to my story of moving the agenda of Black Lives Matter and finding out what works that's going to help them, help us, because we're always being left behind. So we're never included. We're not included in the educational program, even though we're getting educated. I'm not kicking education. I'm just letting you know it's from a white supremacy standpoint and point of view. And all the philosophy they go over never includes us. Everything that they teach, it doesn't include us. I'm glad to hear the young lady say we finally got an ethnic studies class into this school that she came from. But the turnover, when will that ethnic study class be a turnover that's effective today? So why overlook a Black-led organization for somebody that has been going on for a long time? So we need support to move this agenda and to go back to the drawing board every time we need to go back to the drawing board to reduce harm among Black communities, brown communities, disabled communities, homeless communities, poor communities. We need that. And if we do this for the Black Lives Matter, it's automatically going to affect all the other lives and every other community of people that are harmed by the police showing up, an overwhelming presence of the police. So I'm really proud of the work that we're doing in the city because we have researched and shown that more than almost double Black people. We're only 8.4% of Seaside, and almost double the Black people in the city of Seaside are still being arrested by the cops. Why is that? Because the cops get involved with petty little stuff and turns it into a criminal thing. So our program will reduce crime because when we don't have the cops there, there's nobody turning it into a criminal matter. You know, it'll reduce crime because when you know, most of these calls wasn't criminal matters in the first place. So that I'm proud of. And then I've unfolded the challenges that we have with other programs popping up and people wanting to compare. When I did my presentation for the city of Seaside, one of the challenges that we faced is they were strictly biased with my program and they do not want it. The ad hoc committee does not want that program. You can tell immediately how they perform. If you go to the city of Seaside's videos, they have YouTube videos, and there's 4 recent meetings that started happening The second meeting was on the 29th because I did a presentation on that one. And then the next ones happened, I think, about the 5th of October, the 29th of September, 5th of October, and the 7th of October. What I would like people to do is go back and look at the presentation that happened just before the 29th. And it was, I believe, a week before the 29th. I want you to see how they came in immediately with bias toward our program. So this was 3 white men that should never have been on this panel in the first place. The cry for them to put aside the money that we were going after in our city, the outcry was all over the country: defund the police, police are harming us, let's stop it. So who are they harming? The Black people, who and other people as well, but disproportionately Black people. We gotta not forget that. I'm not ashamed to keep saying the Black people because it's disproportionately. Now, when they're harming people unnecessarily and it's all inclusive and not disproportionately, then you won't hear me keep standing up saying the Black people, because that's the lies that we have to look at pulling in to this America. You know, we're a part of America, but the piece has dropped out. The Black piece has dropped out, so we need to plug it back in and show. But anyway, the bottom line is that these people, these Black men, are older Black men, already chauvinistic, already set in their ways with the ideal, and already our skin tone is a problem. But there are 3 Black men on this panel judging a program that is to reduce harm in the community 3 white men, I'm so sorry I made a mistake, but they're judging to reduce harm in the community for Black people. So, or to reduce harm in the community by the police. That was the cry to bring this forward. Now they want to turn it into something else. But I just wanted you to know. And then they had a couple of people on there that had conflict with me. Most recently, the thing that me and that River and the group, me and many other people did at picketing and protesting the Googie Grill in Seaside, where the lady called the cops on a Black person on Juneteenth because they parked in her parking space. And it was, the streets were blocked off, everything was blocked off, because that side of the street, people really didn't come in too much to come into the parking space because of the event. So we have to, as people that care, come together and work together to break up these obstacles and challenges. And one thing I want to ask people to do is to please show up and stop what's really happening in the city of Seaside if you can. On the 15th, they're going to be talking about our program and other programs that came to ask for some of the $300 and something thousand that has been put aside. And they got my program at the bottom. I'm pretty convinced my program will move through and get into the city, but it's just how racism works. I want you to see. People say, well, I'm not racist. Yeah, you don't use those words, but watch what you do and how you operate and what you make happen. That's what you need to watch. Don't play me. It's time to stop playing, because when you get 3 white men, why is there 3 white men in our community trying to judge programs? All they got is the same old soup warmed over. Same old programs that's been in the city for a while. That ain't made a difference. That doesn't stop them from harming us. That doesn't stop them. The 2 people that were shot in Seaside were Latinx. One was killed with the gun right away, and he was holding a baby in his hand. The cop didn't wait on, that cop is at CSUMB. That's why I wanted to show up October the 1st in the first place, so I could educate people there at CSUMB as to this police officer. His name is Manuel. But anyway, we'll get his name. I'll get the name to you. I would have been talking about that day, but he's at CSUMB. I want him away from CSUMB. They told me he was one of the best cops they have. I said, no, he's a killer cop. I said, he shot and killed a man with a baby in his hand in 2014 in the city of Seaside. He was a cop in the city of Seaside for years. They excused him for that. Then he shot another man that got out of his car and ran, and he shot him in the back while he was running several times, paralyzed him. And then the next year, that young man died. I think he was a 26-year-old young man, and he shot him in 2017. He died in 2018. So those are problems that we have in our city. That officer, he got away with that. But guess where he's at now? He's at CSUMB. And I don't like that, because he should not have a job. And he certainly shouldn't be up there on a campus with people learning that already have issues. We don't need that. So anyway, you know, those are some of the obstacles. We need people to show up. We need people to write in and support Pause the Cause in our community, because we want to reduce the harm in the community for Black lives. In turn, we save Black lives, save other people's lives as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Miriam. There was a lot there. I heard the importance of solidarity and like the pride of your collective coming together, sticking together. I heard everyone has a role to play in social change and the revolution, but there always has to be an emphasis on listening to Black voices, and everybody, the whole community does better when Black folks do better. And you also mentioned some things about what can we do, which is a great segue to the very last question before we open it up for the students. But if folks can articulate, Miriam, if you want to add, you can add some more, but you already gave us a lot to think about. What can folks do to support the work of your collective and or your message? And whoever would like to start, or Miriam, if you want to add more to that.
Let me add something, because I keep thinking, you helped me think of it again, but I've been telling people, pass us the mic. Let us unwrap our pain. Let us tell you what's really going on, so that you can understand it from that perspective, from our views, from our inside pain and dealings with all the issues and problems that's been covered up by racism for years. Pass us the mic. If you have a opportunity, our platform, pass it to somebody Black that's a real true activist that's out there trying to make a change and make a difference in our community. You need to hear from Black people. You need to hear from us. We're right here in your community. It's a Black-led organization, so I want to let you know, pass the mic.
I'd like to answer next, if that's okay. I think for me, from what I've seen, is I think it's really important to just show up, like physically show up to, like if you're not immunocompromised, or whatever, your boundaries, within your own boundaries, showing up, going to Zoom meetings, speaking out with your friends, speaking out with your family, having these hard conversations. That's really, really important. People power is everything in this kind of movement. Like Miriam said, you show up, you put in your work, little elbow grease, make mistakes, learn from your mistakes, grow, understand your intersectionality of power and oppression, and find out what works best for you, if that's what you want to do.
Thank you, Ezra. Would Sienna or River like to add to that?
Yes, I'd like to add, as far as just support for the entire movement, like the other two panelists said, Miriam and Ezra, just showing up, and I would say listening, like Miriam is touching on, listening to Black voices is extremely important right now in this moment. We talk a lot about performative activism in SQE and just across the globe. I'm sure you're seen or heard of the term performative activism. So try to make sure you understand what that really means. And even if you don't know what it means, like I know a lot of people are scared to ask questions right now, because right now there seems to be a such thing as stupid questions, because questions can be harmful and hurtful, especially to Black people in this time. But if you have someone who you can go to ask those questions, to educate yourself on what's going on from a true lens and standpoint of what's happening to Black people in the streets, do so. Like, even right now within my own family, I have to educate my family on different things. So it's okay to be in a place where you don't know. But I think the important part is knowing that you would like to know more to help someone else, to help. And like everyone's talking about, understanding your privilege and your intersectionality with your privilege. If you know that you're privileged, we're all privileged in different ways, Black, brown, white, or indifferent. We're all privileged in different ways, but understanding your privilege and wanting to know more about how you can use your privilege to help someone else who is oppressed is the whole name of the game. So don't be afraid to get out there and ask questions. It doesn't matter who you are. Just make sure you can find those peoples and those communities where you can go to and be real and raw, not only with yourselves, but with those around you. And I would also say, just to support SQE and our collective, if you want to know more about SQEs, please don't be afraid to ask. We're on Instagram at CSUSQE.MB. We also have emails. You can email us. I can drop it all in the chat. So please reach out if you're a student looking to get more interested and involved in not only police abolition, but the university's response to COVID-19 and the fees and all the crazy things that we have to pay for even though we're not on campus. Please reach out to SQE. We're always looking for more members, or just generally if you want to know more about the collective and our organization, we'd be more than happy to meet with you or give you some information about us. And yeah, I would say that if you're a student at CSUMB, start listening to what's actually going on. It's kind of difficult right now because we're online and most people are not on campus, but start to look around and see and just listen to little tidbits about our community at CSUMB, because a lot of the times the university likes to sweep all of our issues, especially social justice issues, under the rug as if they're not happening, and that CSUMB is a place that's great for all students. And time and time again, that's truly not the case. And as Miriam was speaking about the officer who got transferred, Manuel Fernandez, who got transferred from Seaside PD to CSUMB, that happens more often than we know of, and that the university lets us know of. We as students are not informed that officers who are the bad apples that the narrative is, who are in the communities of Seaside, Presidio, Monterey, and Salinas, often get transferred to CSUMB when they're under investigation for different things regarding police brutality, because they try to make MB sound like a safe haven for bad officers to come to, so where they can hide a little bit from the public and say, hey, they did all this community service work and all this public safety work at the campus. They're good officers again. Now they can go back into their community that they were taken away from because of whatever situations may have transpired. So I would say, just in regards to different things like that, there's more going on at the university than is let on that many of you might be aware of. And SQE can be part of a platform or a place for you to go to talk about different issues regarding these topics. So if you are informed, get informed. And if you need somewhere to go, you can always come to us.
Thank you, Sienna. River, any final comments? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
So thank you all. Thank you, Dr. Rosales, for having this as well. Yeah, I just shared that tweet in the chat that I was mentioning from Ijeoma Oluo. Look for where your privilege intersects with somebody's oppression. That is a piece of the system you have the power to destroy. And yeah, so like, I don't know, that's a philosophy. That's like, I want to get that tattooed on my body. Maybe I won't jump to that so quick, but I think that number one is educating yourself and taking care of yourself. Diversifying your narrative, so listening to people's experiences whose experiences are different than your own. Including people, I think, depending on the bandwidth you have for it, like I think it's important to hear where people are coming from who maybe have traditionally, had more privilege than you, or like upheld some kind of role of oppressor. I don't want to say that like everybody should make space in their lives for people who are going to oppress them. That's not what I mean. But like it's important to know how Trump supporters are thinking right now. And if you're a Trump supporter, like it's important to know how like Antifa is thinking. Like it's just important to remember that we're all human beings who share a planet, and like everybody has needs, and asking those questions of like, well, why do you feel that way? It's not that one of us is going to be right and one of us is going to be wrong, but rather if we can see where other people are coming from, maybe we can begin to envision and begin to build a system that's going to work for all of us. And when we put the people who are the most marginalized at the center, right? When somebody who is Black and trans and disabled and poor and like, I don't know, incarcerated, right? Like when we put that person at center and make sure their needs are met, make sure they're taken care of, make sure they're seen, heard, and protected, like I don't have to worry, right? At that point, I'm not going to need to worry about my own needs and my own safety, because if we collectively as society, and this might be a little bit utopian thinking, but like, why not think in that direction? Because when we're constantly like looking at like, well, let's find a middle ground, we end up farther right, because we're asking, like we're compromising when we say, well, yeah, that's good enough for now. And that's why the history of a lot of the women's movement and like what we call white feminism, like, wasn't good feminism, because Black women were like, well, these are our issues, and white women were like, well, yeah, but those are Black issues. Let's focus on women's issues, and once we get women's issues taken care of, then we can handle that. And then meanwhile, in the Black rights movement, Black women are like, here's our issues. And like largely male leaders of the Black rights movement are like, well, those are women's issues. So like, once we get these rights figured out for Black people, like, then we can handle that. And the specific oppressions that only Black women face are left behind time and time again. And so that's why I say, like, especially listening to Black women, is because they've been part of multiple movements for many, many years, and have had their needs overlooked. And when we meet their needs, we're meeting everybody's needs. And yeah, so if you want to get involved, like, I would just say start by like reading some books, and figuring out what your privileges are is going to be important, because it's also figuring out what your blind spots are. What are you not seeing? Because you live in, like, we each live in a bubble, and you only see what you invite into your circle. And so diversify your narrative, right? Like, just hear the stories of other folks, of other people, and then take care of yourself, because oppression exists in many realms, in the political and the personal, and that's why we say the personal is political. So if you are like feeling suicidal because everything is weighing so heavy on you, maybe now is not the time to like give your last ounce of energy and your last dollar to somebody else, because we need you alive. Like, we need you, like every single person we need to be, you know, a part of this, and we need you whole. And I'm always telling Miriam, like, are you getting enough sleep? Because we really need her. And she will so willingly self-sacrifice. And then Riley's telling me the same thing, right? Ezra, I'm so sorry, Ezra. Like, they're telling me the same thing. Like, are you taking care of yourself? Because it's so easy for us sometimes to be self-sacrificing, but you can't pour from an empty cup. So like, self-care is super, super major. Yeah, I guess those are my thoughts for now. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, River. Yes, the importance of care, self-care, and community care. I like how you modeled like checking in on other folks in the movement and making sure they're doing well. You know, part of thinking about oppression is also thinking about healing, and how are we going to also work on ourselves and tend to some of the wounds. So now I would like to welcome us into an open forum space. So if you want to turn on your camera to be visible, this final 20 minutes is time where you can ask a question to one of the panelists, and you can use your raise hand function. It looks like Robert has a question. So let me see if I can handle, let's see. Okay, I can lower the hand now. All right, Robert, what would you like to ask?
It was less of a question, and it was kind of piggybacking off what Miriam said about the college police and my experience with them, because it almost seems like this isn't just a Seaside or a CSUMB issue. It's actually an issue among multiple colleges, because when I was within the academy to join the police force, one of the things that I noticed was there's there's some people I had experienced that had been shifted from police to campus police over at places like UC Merced or JC, or even Stanislaus, that have been these like quote unquote bad apples that have had these issues and then just switched to a campus. And as you said, for their days on the beaches, I guess they call them, the time off, but that this issue isn't just localized where you guys are. Like, I didn't even realize how much of an issue that was outside of my area. So I just wanted to thank you necessarily.
Thank you. Other folks, you can use the raise hand feature on what is this? Zoom. I was going to say Instagram. I'm like, this isn't Instagram. Demon, would you like to? I think you're muted. Yeah. Oh, no, you're good. You're good. No, never mind. I thought you were. You're good.
Okay, so I actually have two questions.
obviously I'm Black, and I'm familiar with the oppression and all the issues that our community faces. But how would like someone that doesn't have an invested interest in the Black community, like myself, or like everyday life, how would they get educated about these problems, or like what would be a good resource to look into so that they could potentially get educated? And then I'm sorry, my second question would be, how do we educate ourselves like on these officers that serve in our community that we have no idea about? Like how, like, are these in newspapers, or are these articles, or do we have to go search these stations ourselves and ask these questions from the officers ourselves? So, those are my two questions.
Great questions. Would anyone like to tackle either one of those two questions?
I can answer part two, and then, oh, sorry, Ezra, do you want to go ahead?
No, go ahead, River.
Okay.
You take this one.
I want to like obviously default to the Black voices in the room about how we can all be learning from Black people about what your experiences are like. Although I guess my perspective as a non-Black person, might also be helpful. But regarding like how do you research the officers in this area, they don't make it easy. And that's one of, like, I really would say the central things that Community Before Cops is doing is like trying to just empower people, because it's hard to look at a city council agenda and understand exactly what they're talking about. And it's even harder to figure out, okay, well, how do I go into the Zoom meeting, and when do I say that I want to speak? And it's more accessible in some ways that we don't have to go physically to City Hall and be there for these meetings, but it's less accessible in other ways because of language barriers, because of technological barriers. And so in some ways also, like, we can be more easily silenced because that visible presence of having like 100 people show up to a city council meeting is not felt when we're all like sitting on the phone trying to make our public comments. And so same thing for police records and things. It is all public record, but you do have to request it. However, my group, Miriam's group, a lot of us have already compiled a lot of that information, and you're making me feel like we should put out like a handbook or something. Seriously, because we have this information in like a bunch of Google Docs and like random places, but we should really compile it. But something you can do, you can look at how much police are paid on Transparent California, and you'll find that most police officers make at least $200,000 a year, and or they cost the city at least $200,000 a year. A lot of that money is in overtime pay, and we're not really sure what they're doing with all their overtime hours. A lot of it may be just like filing paperwork that they're getting paid time and a half for, because of the way that they kind of, I'm told, they rigged the system. But you can also like just do a search in the Monterey County Weekly or the Monterey Herald, like our local journalism, do a search within their websites just for police, or like police brutality, or a specific officer's name, like mentioned in the comments, Manuel Fernandez or David Rice. Both are, I think, CSUMB officers right now who are like controversial. And so like the information is out there, but you do have to dig for it. Miriam's group has found all sorts of like 911 call information about like who's calling 911. Like we were able to find that at this restaurant, which is Googie Grill on, it's on Del Monte. It's very visible. That's the place where she's like calling police on Juneteenth because Black people are like in her parking lot. And we were able to discover that since January or February, she had called the police on average once a week about her parking issues. So she really is like utilizing this public service as a like a convenience for dealing with something that you don't need people with guns to deal with, but when you're inviting people with guns to a parking lot full of Black people, like that's potentially violent, right? So anyway, this information is it's out there. You do have to do some work to dig it, but you're making me want to spend the time like making it more accessible. And as far as like, if you don't have a vested interest in Black people's well-being, I want to challenge you to think about how much Black culture you consume on a daily basis, whether it be music, whether it be dance, whether it be hairstyles and fashion, whether it be comedy, whether it be GIF reactions on Facebook. Like if you are reacting with GIFs of Black people, everybody wants to be Black, but nobody wants to be Black is something that I've heard said and resonates true. And so if you love Black culture as much as most Americans do, and even people worldwide, but you don't recognize that the humanity of Black people is threatened by the system under which we live, you need to think on that, right? Like you need to meditate on that. And then once you get into the point where you're like, yeah, okay, maybe Black people do need my help, or like not to come in and be saviors, but like could use my support. I could be an ally for Black people. Then some books that I have like on my shelf. Ijeoma Oluo wrote a book called So You Want to Talk About Race. It's a good place to start. There's Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race. That's a book that's on my shelf. Ta-Nehisi Coates, which is Between the World and Me, is a good one. Or what is his name? Ibrahim X. Kendi, who does like the How to Be Anti-Racist. Those are good places to start, or even just like looking on Twitter and Instagram for just like, if you're not ready to like dive into reading, just start following some Black activists on, even like follow Lizzo, right? Like Lizzo knows what's up. There's a lot out there, and if you just search for it and invite it into your realm, you will start to have your eyes open. Oh, and the very first book on anti-racism that I read, and this is the last thing I'm gonna say, was called Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria? And I read that when I was about 15 because the title stood out to me because that's what I saw at my school, Monterey High School. That taught me a lot about affirmative action, systemic racism. And while that book is, at least a decade old, I think that a lot of what's in there and why we've learned to like ignore race, and race is a taboo thing to talk about, is for the white discomfort with actually addressing the fact that this system is racist. So I recommend that book as well. Okay, thanks for listening.
So if I can chime in on what Damon was saying, I really feel like I can address this because my son was a police officer in Monterey for a little over a year, and then he joined the Marines. And so we have this question a lot because, he's been gone now for like several years, but he was back here a while back because he had surgery. And so he was back here. But we've had that question because with me being his mom, 9 kids, he's my fourth child. And he won an award of the most, when he was 16 years old, of the most volunteer hours in the city of Seaside. So he was active, involved in his community, very well endowed. And he seemingly wanted to be a police, but he ended up in the Marines, and he's no longer a police. But the thing is that our neighbor was a police for over 30 years. I mean, lived as our neighbor for almost 40. And so he knew him very well. So that's how he got in working with him. He became the chief of police the last few years of his time there. So the first thing is to get involved. I put up a thing up. I don't know if you can see that, but get involved. Be a part of what's going on. Don't stand off and be ashamed of your color, ashamed of of Blackness because people tell you, well, don't pull the race card, or don't do this, or it's not about that. Don't just follow the philosophy that's out there, because a lot of times the philosophy out there these days are mainly coming down from, I think River said something about don't ask a white person or whatever, a book or something like that. I forget what she said, but it's mainly coming down from a white philosophy. And so it's been embedded in us since the design of education, when they forced us all together and stopped educating the Black people in schools unless you had a parent that had money, parents that could get on top of it and had status or whatever. Most of us gets left behind. And so I'm running for school board, even myself right now, because my children, 9 of them, got left behind in school. And now my grandchildren got left behind. And by the way, you may find something went wrong with some of how I talk or the way I talk. Well, I didn't learn to read and write until I got grown. I was almost 40. So I still can't. Language is a problem with me. I get things, I'm dyslexic and processing delays. So I get things twisted. So I've been discriminated against all my life because of my disability. And I didn't know. I didn't know why people judge me or talk to me until I started reading and writing. So I'm running now for school board to protect and to include everybody, to help everybody, all the students, not just keep leaving us behind, because I have kids in the school district that I'm raising that are my grandkids and they're being left behind. So just to let you know, the philosophy is there and we are indoctrinated into it because that's all they teach us. They don't accept us. They don't teach us about us. And so we end up being ashamed of us. And it don't matter how much money you got, it don't matter how much you don't have. We are ashamed of us. I have family members that are in my family that are millionaires. Shaquille O'Neal has a baby by my cousin, the first child he ever had, and we dangled with them, a lot in the past. So he's like my cousin. We all were family coming up until he, he married somebody else. But the bottom line is that I have a cousin that's a multimillionaire right here in Fresno, building multimillionaire property, and we get a little money, and we don't realize that cousin that I'm gonna talk about in Fresno got money. So his kid wasn't mixed with our kids, right? And one day his kid just got shot. But he's a Black man, a millionaire, and his kid just got shot. And so my point is you never wanted your kid around because your kid was too good for this, that, and the other, but eventually your kid will get around and get to know these things, right? So our kids need to understand and know reality in the community. And I think about my cousin, his son didn't know reality in the community. He didn't know that he was really a Black person and identified as a Black person. To him, he had lived a different life. He had lived a different way. So we need to always collaborate and come together and work together with each other. And I say to you, follow and I said all that because I'm not really sure where your question is coming from, with the exception of you're not really that involved. So how do you learn and how do you know and how do you get involved? And I say follow, so that you are able to see how harm is being done to an area that you've never been a part of or familiar with. Follow us and be a part of us, volunteer with us so that you can get an idea of what we're really doing, because we're tearing apart the records of the city. We're like the other young man wanted to talk about, finding this information. Our team is doing that. We're tearing apart everything in the city. We're vetting it ourselves. We're not taking the newspaper as as the Bible. If the newspaper say it, we're not believing it. We're vetting the newspaper. We're finding out information. That's how we know about Manuel Fernandez, because we vetted it ourselves and went and found out that the witnesses that saw the man, he said the man had a machete. If you look it up, the man had a machete. He's the only one who saw the man with the machete. Now, mind you, he turned his camera off. He did not wait for none of his partners to show up, okay? And he shot and killed a man holding a baby in his hand, okay, in the back of the neck. But he said the man had a machete. We vetted it and found out the witnesses said there was nothing in the man's hand. So cops lie, and we have to work together to pull the information up, to team together to get all this. So I don't want to go longer, but we're doing the work. Join us. There's more work to do. You could be a part of it. And whatever you want to know, whatever you want to do, be a part of it. Both of you young men. Thank you for speaking.
And Scott had a question next, and I think he meant to share this on the everyone chat, but not just to me, but I think he also has some interest in helping compile some of that information with community before cops and possibly action teams 831. So go ahead, Scott.
Thank you. Yes, that was true. I meant to send that to everyone in the chat, but My question goes to community before cops. I noticed on the on your website that the demands for the city councils are listed for Monterey, Pacific Grove, Seaside, but the demands are not listed for cities like Salinas, Marina, and South County. So I was wondering maybe if that's changed and just hasn't gotten onto the website, and then also why that is, if those demands are not out there already.
Yeah, so River, correct me if I'm wrong. I haven't really been involved for the last month and a half because I've been focusing on school. I'm a student here, by the way. We were focusing on that, and we realized Reinvest 831 already kind of has those areas covered in terms of like they've been present for years doing this kind of work, and we didn't want to step on their shoes. So we are doing our best to support them. But that means that we cannot create those demands if it might conflict with the work that they're already doing as a POC-led organization. Is that right, River? Is that still correct?
Yeah, I honestly, like, as I mentioned, we're like a loose coalition of people who just kind of show up on any given day. But our demands were from back in June when that budget cycle was coming through. And it is something that we should look at again because like budget reviews are going to be coming up. There are many other groups in Salinas specifically. And I think if they have demands that are articulated well, like we should be putting their demands on our website with crediting them, of course, rather than like, just because of the way that our org kind of organically formed, and again, being like majority white and majority peninsula based, we know that we can't speak for what other communities need. But that for those of us, like I'm a Seaside resident for a long time, and we had other people who were Pacific Grove and Monterey. It's a little easier to speak for our, I don't know. That's a really good question, and that's something that we ought to look up. It's definitely not something that we neglected intentionally, or if we did refrain from saying anything intentionally, it's because we don't want to be speaking for communities that we don't necessarily speak. That we don't belong to. So yeah, so I'll take a look at that because we should definitely have as much information as we can. I know that some of the Salinas demands within that budget cycle was to reduce the police budget from 45% of the total budget, because that's the budgets we're talking about, is like millions and millions and millions and millions of policing, while people are like, oh, could I please get, I don't know, like Salinas is closing homeless shelters. And so some of the Salinas organizers were asking the city to reduce the police budget from 45% of the total budget to 30%, and that didn't happen, of course. And actually, we followed their lead in Seaside to ask Seaside the same thing, and that didn't happen, of course. But again, it's like we can't be the ones compromising. The city council is compromising between what we're asking and like what the police are asking. So we want to ask as much as possible and hope that we can get as much as we are asking for, and know that there will likely be compromise.
Wonderful. So I think we're just about out of time. I want to be mindful because it's now 2:30 and we said we would end this event at 2:30, but I want to just close by saying like, well, first of all, thank you all, the panelists, for being here, students, even yourselves, for being present and taking this all in. I know some of this information for some of you folks may be new or maybe hard to swallow. We talked about cognitive dissonance last week. So thank you for being open and listening. Yeah, thank you to the panelists. This is like, when I see folks like this in the community, I always think like these are today's revolutionaries. And maybe like later on in the future, we'll read about them in history books, but also not everyone becomes famous. The project that we're doing for this class is called the MLK Project, but there were so many people that were part of the civil rights movement that never got the spotlight that were doing the work. So it's just such an honor and a privilege to be able to sit with these folks and listen to them. And thank you all for your brilliance. Thank you all for what you do in the community. If you have any like I think River, thank you. You're one step ahead of me, River. Yeah, if you didn't get to ask a question or you wanted to ask a follow-up, I recommend you connect to the contact that they put in the chat, their Instagram, their emails, and ask that follow-up question. But anyways, thank you all so much. And I don't know how to end online Zoom meetings, but can we, I'm just gonna give you a round of applause, and if we could turn it on to say, or snaps, and just say thank you so much for being here. All right. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.